Hello and welcome to Creating Disciples with me, Austin Roberts. We are so excited to have you join us today as we are going to be taking a look at one of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. To be specific, we're going to be looking at the church in the city of Philadelphia today. God has a message for those people and a message for us, perhaps one that might speak to you in a very real and powerful way. So we hope you enjoy this message as God brings it to us today. Have you ever been in a place of great discouragement? Somewhere where nothing seems to go right, where no matter what you do, no matter how you act or where you are, things just cannot seem to go right. Well, I remember a time back when I was at Walla Walla University, a specific day where I was having a bit of a tough day, in fact. And there was a lot of stress, and I think that was probably due to all the things that were going on that year. It was my senior year, so that was a big deal. I had fully loaded up on all the classes that I needed to take in order to graduate, so there was a lot of studying, a lot of homework, quizzes, tests, lots of those things going on. That took a lot of time. I was working for the student government as the spiritual vice president, so that also took a lot of time, although I enjoyed that a great deal. I was playing intramurals, which was a time commitment almost every evening. I had a functioning social life to a point at least, so that took up a lot of time. And so there was just a lot going on. And I felt like some days, like I just wanted to kind of crawl in a hole and see nobody for a very long time. It was stressful and it was very tiring. Well, on one particular day, I decided that I would go to Dutch Bros, which is a local coffee shop there in the Pacific Northwest. So I got in my car and drove over there, and I ordered a drink, and then I drove back to my apartment. Well, as I got to my apartment, I parked the car, and I opened the door to get out, and I grabbed my drink, and as I did so and made my exit from the car, something happened. You see, as I did that, I accidentally hit my drink on the door of the car, and when I did that, the top just popped right off, and the whole drink spilled everywhere, all over the ground, the tarmac, the door of the car, my pants, my shoes. And I just stood there for a minute thinking, are you kidding me? All this that's going on, and as if nothing else could go wrong or could go better, I spilled this drink all over the place. This is the last thing I needed. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere like that, but it can be tough to be in a place where you are already greatly discouraged and then something else goes wrong on top of that. It's a difficult situation to be in, one that you maybe are familiar with yourself. Well, I remember another time. It was a time when I was working and my phone broke, and I didn't know what to do with it, but it was a busy Labor Day weekend and I didn't have time to really deal with it. So I went the whole weekend kind of dark, and my phone was broken. It wasn't working at all. The screen wouldn't even turn on. I tried everything. I tried resetting it. I tried plugging it in to my computer and to iTunes, but nothing would work. Well, that Labor Day weekend was busy, but finally on Tuesday, I had an appointment at the Apple store. So I took my phone in to the store, and they said, okay, we'll take a look at it. So they took it to the back and messed around with it for a while. And then they came back out and said, listen, there's been a hardware issue on this phone, something that we actually can't fix. So they gave me a brand new phone, for which I was eternally grateful. I was like, wow, thank you. Really appreciate that. Well, time went on, went back to the apartment, and at that time I had 2 different roommates, and we had a couple of parking spaces in our complex. And each of my roommates had a parking space, and I just parked on the street. Well, as the story goes, we had some issues with those parking spaces, and the security at the apartment complex wasn't very good at enforcing the rules. So from time to time, one of our spaces would be parked in by someone else. And we were not very happy about that, obviously. But on that night in particular, someone else had parked in one of my roommate's spaces. And so he was obviously frustrated, but there was nothing he could do because it was late at night and the tow company wouldn't come, and there were other issues with the apartment complex and they wouldn't send somebody. So finally he was just like, fine. So he took his car and he parked outside. And then the next morning he went out to go to work and his car was gone. And he called the city and it had been towed. You see, unbeknownst to him, he'd accidentally parked in a place where it wasn't allowed. And so the city had come and had towed him away. Well, he was understandably very frustrated at this situation. And so he called me and asked me if I could give him a ride to the tow yard. And I, of course, said, yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry this happened, but I'm happy to give you a ride to the tow yard. So we went to my car, and he gave me the address for the tow yard. I punched it in the GPS, and to the tow yard we headed. Well, as we headed there, something funny happened. With that new phone I had just gotten a couple days previous, the screen went dark. It went completely black. And I was sitting there driving thinking, are you serious? I just replaced this. Are you kidding? Well, anyway, by the grace of God, we made it to the tow yard, and he got his car $400 later. And I was understandably frustrated, so I immediately drove right back to the Apple store and said, listen, I'm having this problem. You guys just replaced this phone. And they said, okay, well, we'll take a look at it, but we've got other appointments backed up, so we can't do it for about 45 minutes. And so I thought, fine. I walked around the mall, just did some window shopping. I just had to kill some time there. But finally I went back, and they brought the phone out to me and said, well, here's your phone. We don't know what's wrong. The screen just came back on, and we can't diagnose the problem. And I was standing there thinking, oh, this better not happen again. After all this, it just works. Have you ever been there where just nothing seems to go right? It's a place of great discouragement. There are just issues no matter which way you seem to turn. Well, if you've ever been there, maybe we have a text for you. In fact, I would like you to open with me to the book of Revelation. We're going to read out of the 3rd chapter, and in a few moments we'll begin with verse 7. You see, this is a letter to the church in Philadelphia. But before we read about that church, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of Philadelphia. You see, Philadelphia is not really like many of the previous cities we've heard about. It's not grand and it's not important. It's not a huge deal. It was, in fact, a colony of the city of Pergamum, another city we read about earlier. And they'd put this colony out there, kind of at the crossroads of 3 different provinces of Mysia, Lydia, and Phrygia. And they put it there for a specific reason. They thought, okay, we're going to put this city here, and that way we will be able to spread our language and culture throughout these provinces. It will help us. And so that's what they did. They put the city there with that reason in mind, to spread that language and that culture. And it was a good city. It was a cultured city. There were people there, and they didn't have tremendous hardship. They had enough money, and they were fine. But the city of Philadelphia had one secret that haunted them. You see, many years previous, there had been a major earthquake in that area of the world that had destroyed about 10 cities. Well, as time goes, they had rebuilt these cities, but Philadelphia was a bit of a different situation. You see, Philadelphia had rebuilt somewhat, but the problem was that unlike the other 9 cities, Philadelphia still dealt with the aftershocks of the earthquake for years and years to come. And these were strong aftershocks, so much so they could destroy city streets, they could knock buildings down. And so despite the good time that they were having in Philadelphia, they lived with this constant fear of these earthquakes. In fact, many considered people who lived inside the city walls of Philadelphia to be crazy. They thought, we can't live in there. We don't want to risk our lives on a daily basis because we don't want these earthquakes to come and knock a building down on us and kill us. And so that's the context into which we step today. It's this city, Philadelphia. It's a good place. They're spreading this culture, but they've got this dark and dirty secret that gives them great fear every single day. Well, with that in mind, we're going to read part of this letter. We're going to read verses 7 to 10. And so let's read it together. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write. These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you keep my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. So there are a couple things that immediately jump out of the text at this moment. First is that these people appear to be in trouble and to be weak. In fact, this is only the second of two letters that are in these 7 churches where Jesus says nothing negative about the church. They are dealing with great peril and great strife. And so he says words of encouragement. He doesn't say anything that they are doing wrong, that they need to repent, do better, remember, none of that. He only gives them words of encouragement. And he says, listen, it will be okay. You will survive. I am here to encourage these people. So that's what Jesus does. And that is immediately apparent as we read this text. So not only are they suffering in hard times, they are also weak. So the question is, why are they weak? Why are the people in this city, or the church in this city of Philadelphia, weak? And there are a couple of possible reasons. One, it is likely that the church is small in size and that they have very little influence in the world that surrounds them in that day. So they don't have a lot of pull, a lot of sway, and they're small. And so as an organization, they're weak. They just don't have a lot to go on. And so that's tough. And secondly, we have the mention of the synagogue of Satan. And this is actually the second time they're mentioned in these churches. We had them mentioned a church or two ago. And they are bad people. In fact, if you remember, I believe it was in the church of Sardis, the synagogue of Satan is mentioned. And these people spread slander and they spread lies. They say terrible things like they're cannibals because they eat the body and blood of Christ. They have agape feasts, which are really orgies. They're atheists because they have no images and no idols. And they split families because people lead their families to become Christians, followers of Christ. So they have these things that are really making life difficult for the church in Philadelphia. And Jesus realizes that, and he mentions it here. That's why they are weak. These are the reasons he gives. They're in a tough situation. They're not in an easy spot. But once again, because of that, there is nothing negative said about this church. Jesus is wise and he is good. So he understands what he's got to do to help these people. And so he does something interesting that he has done before, but that we haven't really talked about much. We're going to go back to the text here. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and when he shuts, no one can open. Jesus kind of gives his own resume or credentials, if you will, at the beginning of this letter. And he says three things about who and what he is. First, he says, I am holy. And so he makes it very clear who he is. He says, I am holy. And so he stands there and he says, I'm the number one. I am it. And that's a big deal for them because they are following a holy and great God. And Jesus stands there immediately and talks about that. So that's the first kind of credential that he gives in this moment. But then there's a second thing he says, and that's this. He says, I am true. Now, the word truth in the original language is translated a couple ways. There are a couple different Greek words that are translated to mean true. First, there is aletheis. Now, when the word aletheis is used, it means something that is true versus something that is false, true and untrue. And that's a word that is used from time to time in Scripture. However, that is not the word that is used in this particular instance. There's a different word, and that is the word alethinos. Now, alethinos is a word that is used to differentiate between something that is real and something that is not real. And that's a different thing. So Jesus stands here and he says, I am true, I am real, I am physical, and even though you may not be able to see me right in front of you or hear me speak to you audibly, I'm still there. And that's a major thing for these Christians because they are weak and they are struggling. It is hard times and weak people. And Jesus steps into this context and says, listen, I understand you're dealing with very difficult times, hard situations, things that are out of your control, and that you're also weak. You're a small organization. There aren't many of you. There are others out there that are telling lies about you, that are slandering you. And so these situations together are tough to be in. And he understands that. But he says, despite that, even though you're in these difficult situations, I am here. I am real. I am true. And then he says a final thing. And he says here, I hold the key of David. What I open, no one can shut, and what I shut, no one can open. And so once again, the question arises, what does that mean? What is the key of David? And what can he shut, and what can he open? What is the door that he is referring to in this context? Well, scholars have debated what that means, and there are a few different theories, but there is one particular theory that I would like to tell you today, which I think is probably the true theory. And there are scholars who believe this, but it is debated. What is that open door? Well, that is this. You see, if you remember, the city of Philadelphia is placed somewhere as a colony to spread the word, to spread the culture and to spread the language to the surrounding areas and regions. And so Jesus says, listen, hard times, weak people, but you are in a place in Philadelphia that is meant to spread culture and that is meant to spread language to the surrounding area. Take advantage of that opportunity, he says. You're in a place where you have the ability to spread a lot of things. Why don't you spread the word of Christ and the gospel to the surrounding nations and to the people who are there? This is not an opportunity that is afforded to everybody, but you have it. So use it. Back in many, many years ago, there was a book written by Phil Pringle entitled The Top 10 Qualities of a Great Leader. And Pringle tells a story from many years ago about the Great Irish Potato Famine. You see, during that time, there was a span of about 10, 15 years where potatoes would not grow at the rate that they would normally grow at in Ireland. And this was very, very difficult for those people because that was their livelihood. That's how they made money. That's how they lived. They grew potatoes. They ate them. They sold them. But they weren't growing. And so that made it very difficult. They went hungry. They starved. The economy was in trouble. There were lots of things that were affected because of this. Well, as the story goes, John Bloomfield, who was one of the landowners in that area, was trying to salvage some sense of something. He had obviously had great difficulty, and many of the people who lived on the land that he owned had also been in great difficulty, and they were poor, and they were hungry. Well, he was walking around his property, and he noticed that many of the houses that his tenants had built had this very beautiful white and clear finish. And he didn't know what that was, but it looked unusual to him. So he got some people together who knew what they were talking about, and he said, go out there and figure out what's going on. Why is there this beautiful white finish on many of these homes. So they went out there and they did their work, their research, their digging, and they came back to Bloomfield and said, well, there's a reason for that actually, and that is that you have clay on your property that is rare. In fact, it's beautiful and it has this gorgeous white finish, and that is the material that they've used on their houses to build them. And Bloomfield said, okay. And he came up with an idea. He built a pottery mill, and he built it so that the people there could have employment and money and food, and he started to use that clay to make pottery. And today, Balik Pottery is a multi-million-dollar company that you can buy pottery from all over the world. You see, Bloomfield had an opportunity. He was down and he was out, as were the people who lived on his property. It was hard times, and they were weak people. But he saw an open door and he went through it. He saw that opportunity and he thought, listen, I can make something of this. We can do something about this. And so I guess you could say there is a bit of an equation here. And the equation is this. It is hard times plus weak people plus a strong God equals endless opportunity. Even though these people may have nothing, they've got something, and they've got God. And that's what he says. He says, I have left you this open door here. Use this opportunity that I have given you to spread the word to the surrounding areas and nations. Spread the gospel so we bring more people into the fold of Christ. You have this opportunity. So once again, hard times plus weak people plus a strong God equals endless opportunity, opportunity we would never even dream of. But the letter doesn't end there. There is a little bit left. Verses 11 to 13, so let's read those. Jesus says this, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And so despite the weakness and the difficulty that these people are in, God gives them one command, one directive. He says, hold on. Just hold on because I am coming for you. Become pillars. A little while back, I read a book and saw a film, both by the same title. That was Unbroken. The film is based on the book. And it is the story of Louis Zamperini, who was an Olympic runner for the United States and then a soldier for the United States during World War II. And it tells the story of Zamperini, and it tells the story of when he was in a plane and it crashed into the ocean. And they spent many days and many nights in the ocean, and they were eventually rescued by a Japanese ship. Well, as the story goes, the Japanese were brutal and torturous to their prisoners of war, Zamperini included. And I remember one particular incident. You see, by this time, Zamperini had been to a couple of different internment camps, and he had been tortured beyond belief. But there was one person, one of the Japanese men, who in particular had it out for him. And his name was Mutsuhiro Watanabe. And Watanabe hated Zamperini. And it wasn't entirely clear why he hated Zamperini, but he did anyway, and he tortured him, and he was brutal. Well, at one particular instance, Corporal Watanabe pulled Zamperini out from work, and he made him stand there. And he made Zamperini stand there and hold a 6-foot wooden beam above his head. And you have to understand that by this time he had been there for so long, along with the many other prisoners of war, and they hadn't eaten well, and they were sick with dysentery and other diseases, and they were worked to the bone day in, day out, no breaks at all, and they were in trouble. Well, this is the point at which Watanabe came and made Zamperini hold that 6-foot beam of wood above his head and would not let him drop it. And he wouldn't let him drop it. And what had originally been intended as a moment of torture turned into a moment of defiance for Zamperini and the other men who stood there and watched. You see, Zamperini held that 6-foot beam of wood above his head for 37 minutes in his weak state. And he stood there, and he stood there, and he stood there. In fact, as I read this portion of the book and as I watched that part of the film, in my mind, all I could think was, hold on. Just hold on. You see, unbeknownst to Zamperini, in that moment, the Allies were coming. And it wouldn't be long before they would get there and relieve everybody and free the prisoners. But in that moment, Zamperini didn't know that. And there was nothing he could do except hold on. In fact, after those 37 minutes, Watanabe was so angry that the only reason Zamperini dropped the beam of wood was because Watanabe hit him and knocked him down. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying to the people here. He's saying, just hold on. You may not be able to see tomorrow, but I am coming. And so that equation rings forever true. He says, listen, he says hard times plus weak people plus a strong God mean one thing, and they mean endless opportunity for you. I have opened that door so you can go out and spread the gospel to the surrounding nations and to the world. So just hold on, Jesus says, for I am coming. You may not be able to see tomorrow. You may be in a situation in your own life where it is hard to see around the corner or over the hill. But there is an opportunity waiting for you because Jesus has opened that door. And he stands there at the door and he just says, hold on. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. Just be faithful a little more. Hold on. Thank you so much for joining us today on Creating Disciples. We hope you have a wonderful and blessed day. And if you are struggling, we would encourage you just to hold on. May God bless you. Amen.